Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Corporate Services. We have some added, you'll see on the added. I'll look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll turn to consent items 2 through 5. Anybody want anything pulled out of there? Number 2, Councillor Morgan. Okay. I'm sorry? You're moving them? Councillor Park, did you want something pulled?
No, but I'd like to just make a comment on 3. I would do that at your leisure, Chair.
Okay. Why don't we move 3, 4, and 5? And while that's happening, Councillor Park, your comment on 3, please.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to thank staff for the diligence in this report coming back to us. I think it's a great news story about how effectively we used resources and what we can do going forward with what was left over. Thank you.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, comprehensive would be one word to use, but also it gives us, you know, the sort of the starting place and the ending place in terms of these projects, which is really, really helpful. So thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. Oh, sorry, on 3? Councilor? Okay, on 4?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did want to make a comment on 4. I didn't need to pull it. This is the move towards an expropriation of a piece of property in the Medway Trail Master Plan. I won't make a lot of comments on it because it's, you know, it's moving towards a step in the process, but certainly this is, the connection of this trail is something that is very important to the community. It is a gap in the entire trail system. There's a temporary trail that goes around to the north of this property at this time, but certainly something that I know the community is looking forward to seeing a resolution to, regardless of the path that we need to take that resolution. So I'm happy to see this progressing in some way, and you know, we'll see what the next steps are, but very supportive of this particular item. I know that this goes back even to Mayor Brown's term as the ward representative. You can see that from the list of previous reports. So it's been something that has been a long time coming, and expropriation isn't something that's done lightly, but this is a long time gap in the trail system.
Thank you. Just briefly on item number 3, this report just keeps getting better and better in terms of the amount of material that's being covered, especially Appendix B. I find very helpful to understand, you know, what exactly is going on with these projects, when do we expect them to be completed. Great way of keeping an eye on the capital projects.
Call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, let's cycle back to item number 2.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that the committee agenda looked light because that allows me time to ask lots of questions about this particular report. So the operating budget year-end monitoring report is, I think, one that I think our treasurer now, CAO, would have expected us with this committee's composition to ask a few questions on. And I do have a few, given the way that it came out. I'll ask a number of them, and I'll probably wait to see what my colleagues have to say about it and then engage in some of the discussion. So I think the best way to do this is just to kind of flow through it. The questions that I have relate to some of the directions and the rationale stemming from it.
I think staff has a presentation.
Oh, I don't know. The counselor beside me is asking if staff was going to present on this. I don't anticipate them. Okay. No. Okay, so I'll continue on. I have some questions about some of the components in the report. So I think the easiest way is for me just to list the page numbers, ask the questions, and see what the answers are. I'll start on page 6 of our agenda package, which is, I think, page 3 of the report. The winter maintenance deficit, which is a result of higher than anticipated costs in operating supplies and replenishing salt domes. I know that there's a $1 million draw that is going against what would be the projected surplus. I'm wondering, do we not have a winter maintenance reserve fund? And is there a reason why we didn't draw from that, or is the balance of that fund not in a healthy state, and we're using this as one method of bolstering that? So that's my first question.
Larry, would you like to take that?
Generally, we like to keep a sufficient balance in our severe weather reserve. And in this case here, the councillor is correct. If we decide to draw down from the reserve, all it would do is increase the overall corporate surplus. So it's more or less a finance decision as to where we take the money from. And we look at reserves and reserve balances in an aggregate, and we thought it was appropriate to leave the severe weather reserve balance as it is.
And if you have to look this up, I'm curious, what will that bring the reserve balance to in that fund? And is that level in line with, you know, our previous needs for the buffer that we need for the risk reward and the, you know, the draw? Because we never know what the weather's going to be like. I certainly support a reserve fund, but I'm just curious on what that brings us to. And is that adequate, or are we in a position where we still need to bolster it? I'll go to my next question maybe and let you look that one up. The next one I wanted to ask.
Councillor, could you just pause just when staff's kind of scurrying to get the answer for you? Let's just get that answer for you and then move on.
So the severe weather reserve balance is approximately $1.3 million right now, and my recollection in past you know, severe weather experiences, it could that balance, the expenditures could easily fluctuate $1 to $2 million in a, you know, heavy snow season.
So this move would bring it to 2.3.
If we decided to fund the deficit from the severe weather reserve, it would basically increase your corporate surplus to 5.6 million rather than the 4.6, because you'd be drawing down from this reserve balance, the deficit.
I understand that. What I'm asking is the 1.3 number, the one that you've given me, include that $1 million contribution, or is that going to bring the total to 2.3?
That does not include the $1 million draw. Okay.
Great, thank you. My next question is on Dundas Place, which is listed here, and I know that we've allocated in the multi-year budget process between $15 and $16 million for that. And there was an announcement of some federal contributions to that. So there are no implications in this report for surplus because we haven't drawn that. We're expected to use debt for that, I'm anticipating, and so we're just not going to have to draw that debt because of the federal contribution. Is that the case?
We would have to get back to you on that response, Councillor. We can collect that information for you.
My final question is in the recommendations, and then I'll let my colleagues weigh in. In the recommendations, it's being suggested that we do a couple things with the surplus before it hits our surplus policy. The first is allocate $3 million towards the Lower Nab Public School project for the demolition. And then there's a request, which doesn't have any sort of direction to it, of $2 million from the Housing Development Corporation. Although there would only, if we did the Lower Nab item, there would only be 1.6 million left. I know that there's also a $3.5 million contribution to the Efficiency, Effectiveness, and Economy Reserve Fund as part of the recommendations. So I guess my question for staff is the balance sufficient and the contribution sufficient in the EEE fund to fund the types of things that we need to move forward? Or can we use, if this committee would so recommend to council, a portion of that if we were to follow the recommendations, that we could actually fulfill the Housing Development Corporation request of $2 million by shifting some over, or would that create problems in the EEE fund? In other words, I'm looking for some staff advice here, because there wasn't really a direction tied to this, and I wasn't sure if you're anticipating us suggesting 1.6 million, or because certainly there's a case for funding the Housing Development Corporation, which I think is very positive, and I'm looking for a possible way to do that.
So through the chair, in terms of what we've put in front of you, we're just saying it be considered because you'd referred it here through the budget process. Am I personally recommending it? No, not at this point, I wouldn't. But if you are looking for a way to fund it to this extent, you can, it's open to you to take from whatever reserve funds you would like to. Triple E would be one that we could potentially draw on to supplement it. Just if we did that, you would have nothing going to reducing to the policy pieces, reducing unauthorized but issues debt and those types of things as listed in item number 5. So.
Thank you through the chair. So that's helpful because that direction wasn't, I don't think, articulated clear in the report. So your recommendation, given the policy, and I just want to be clear, is that we authorize the expenditure to fund the Lorne Ave demolition, but not at this time do anything with the Housing Development Corporation's request and let that flow to the surplus policy for allocation that way.
That's correct.
Those are the questions I have for now, Chair.
Okay, anyone else? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. Just maybe as a follow-up, you know, we find ourselves in a unique situation with Lorne Ave Public School, and I think that there's always a small matter of the bill. And, you know, we did a very positive thing by taking over that property for a neighborhood. You know, it's an incredible gem in the heart of Old East. It's one green space where there's, you know, very few other green spaces, but then there is the small matter of the bill, and because this is, I think, a unique situation, it requires a unique solution, and that's, you know, covering the cost in this way. My question is really around the Housing Development Corporation and the 1.6 million, and I'm wondering if we could hear from staff what will be done with that 1.6 million, because obviously, you know, housing is a significant priority for our community, and we have another new situation with a new corporation, and I'm trying to get a sense of the impact that this kind of funding would have on our housing crisis.
So through the chair, there was a business case put forward with the budget, and my understanding is that the federal and provincial governments have come to the table with some additional funding, and that this would actually help leverage that up in terms of how we would use it. But I believe Mr. Justizi is here somewhere, yeah, and he might be able to speak to it a little better than me.
Mr. Justicia?
It's on now. There we go. Through the chair, thank you. First of all, I understand the complexity of your multiple priorities, so it will be what it'll be. As far as what we've done, I think it's important to reflect on what happened last year. What happened last year is halfway through the year, we got another injection of what they called social infrastructure funding from the province and federal government. Because of that, we ended up expending about $3 million last year. So we expended far more than we were anticipating, because when we cost match in our municipal dollars, each dollar of a municipal dollar that we expense, or maybe perhaps a better way of saying it is, for every about $75,000 to $100,000, we get another permanent unit of affordable housing. I say permanent because now we're getting them for 35 years. And the other thing that we did in our municipal funds last year was, with both allocations, the allocation that you made in May and the allocation that you made in October, in both of those allocations, you will either get them back with interest at the end of the period, which is 30 years in one and 35 years in the other. So you'll get it back as an investment, or it will act as a tool to sustain affordable housing on an ongoing basis. So the position that we're in right now is we've expensed more in 2016 than we were anticipating. You've got a new board in place, and you've charged that board with activities such as land acquisition and sale, at the same time as we have about $10 million of federal and provincial money this year to expense. So what I'm a little bit concerned about is that we want to make sure that the charge that you've laid to us corporately has enough funding in it to be able to do both the activities of cost matching our municipal dollars with our federal provincial, as well as the activities of being able to do investment. And remember, you have the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, which means that if it isn't invested, it is also allowed to be carried over in the course of the next 2 years. We know right now we've got approximately $6 million, 5.9 over the course of the next 2 years, each year. And what we also know is the federal government just made an announcement that they're going to provide us more details on, which means that we're anticipating far more funding coming. And your municipal dollars are actually being leveraged in ways that most municipalities aren't able to do. So I'll leave you with that, and I can certainly speak to the value and return on the investment in infinite detail, as you probably know.
Thank you. Mayor?
Well, Chair, I for one urge my colleagues to support this, this opportunity. We've identified affordable housing as a significant priority in our strategic plan, and there are times when you have to skate to where the puck is going, as the saying goes. The federal government, through their most recent budget, announced, I believe it was $11.2 billion in funding for housing programs over the next 11 years, and we need to be ready to put our share on the table as well. And I think what this does is it presents us with an opportunity to, again, direct resources to provide housing for our most vulnerable people living in our community. I'll remind you that 68,000 people are living in London experiencing poverty. We have a wait list for some of our housing programs that is in the thousands, and that there are parents and kids waiting over a year and a half for housing. So the stock that we have is in dire need of repair in many cases, and we also have a need to put more stock online. The federal government's coming forward, and the provinces programs as well, and this I think would help us more directly address the need.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say that I agree fully with what the mayor just said, and I want to add some comments to that. But before I do that, I just want to have some clarity on this number 4, because it said be considered. And what I'm hearing here is that this is not recommending that we approved anything for the housing, not even the 1.6. Am I?
Yeah, maybe I could be helpful. I think, according to Mr. Hayward's comment, he was not recommending it. However, if committee would like to recommend it, then that recommendation probably should be modified. The language should be amended so that it's not being considered, but be authorized. Okay, so that's at the discretion of the committee. So.
And that's exactly what I was getting to, Mr. Chair. So if we want to authorize it, then we want to authorize $2 million. Where would the other $0.4 million come from, or should we just authorize the $1.6 million at this time?
Councillor, if I may, and I'll look to either Mr. Palach or Mr. Hayward, there isn't $2 million, there's 1.6. So unless you're going to go to another reserve account and move it over, so at the very maximum, and I think that's a different conversation. This is about what we do with our operating surplus at the end of 2016 versus that would be another budget case where you're finding money from other sources. So I think the maximum, according to policy, that we can deal with today is 1.6.
And that's what I was trying to get at. Is that?
So quickly on the numbers, the property tax supported surplus is 4.6 million. If council approves recommendation number 3, which is basically deals with Lorne Avenue for a $3 million request, that leaves you with $1.6 million in the property tax supported surplus. So that $1.6 million, you can consider utilizing that funding to fund the Housing Corporation ask, to noting that there'd be about a $400,000 shortfall to their ask. You can fund them up to 1.6 million. And we also noted that your surplus policy, specifically states how you would allocate the $1.6 million. If you chose not to fund the housing corp, you'd basically cancel authorized but unissued debt to approximately 50% or 800,000. The 25% or 200,000 or $400,000 would go towards the Community Investment Reserve Fund, with the balance going into the Capital Infrastructure Gap Reserve Fund. So there's some choices for council.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, if we would allocate this 1.6 to the housing, then recommendation number 5 become obsolete?
Yes.
That would be true.
So, okay,
Yes.
so my other question is to do with number 3. I can't remember the numbers that we talked about Lorne Avenue, so can you help me how we come up with the $3 million for Lorne Avenue?
Through the chair, that's the estimated demolition cost. There's some substances in there that we'd have to deal with that are expensive. There's some archaeological studies that have to be done, a whole bunch of things surrounding the demolition of the building. We can break it down in more detail for you if you wish. Mr. Wellhauser is here.
I just wanted to know if you could, if it was 2.6, what would happen?
Well, hopefully we would report it back as a surplus and you could reallocate it somewhere else at that point.
So Mr. Chair, going back to the mayor's comment, I was just trying to make sure, I was trying to bring this 1.6 to $2 million because I want to move that we authorize the 1.6 for housing. And I want to back up what the mayor said, because we, as a municipality, accompanied by the big city mayors and accompanied by FCM and accompanied by AMO, have worked hard over the years to get the federal government coming on board with housing. And for the first time, they are allocating money to housing, 11-point-something billion over 10 or 11 years. And they're coming up with a housing strategy. And I believe that we should come on board with this. We should be right there as a partner, rather than sitting back and expecting them to give everything. I feel we've got to have something in our kitty in order to support that and be there with the province and the federal government. And like I said, and as the mayor said, in the budget this year, they talked about it last year. They came about this year with funds, at least they identified the funds for it. So I believe that we should do the same. So this $1.6 million, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we allocate that to the housing. Thank you.
Councillor, just in committee, you'll note on your screen, the clerk has adjusted D to be an approved of the 1.6, okay? If you want to move the entire motion, Councillor, that would be fine too. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question, and it does not mean that I have a plan behind the question. I just need the information. What are the carrying costs if we were to defer the project with Lorne Ave Public School? If anybody has a ballpark figure, I'd be most appreciative.
Mr. Wellhauser, do you have that number?
Through the chair, I seem to recall we are approximately $75,000 to $100,000 a year. I'd have to double check and all the information with me, but there are costs around utilities, maintenance. We're covering off any kind of vandalism that occurs on the site. I don't, like I said, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I think it's sub 100,000 per year.
Thank you, that's quite helpful. Overall, I'm very supportive of giving the funding to the Housing Development Corporation, and in my view, I feel like it is quite akin to the sentiment behind the surplus reserve fund that we created. Community investment, that's investing in our community, and it's also helping to address the severe gap that we have in our housing stock at this point in time. I'm just not sure about the numbers just yet. Recognizing the importance of Lorne Avenue in the Old East, I just wonder if we should put our mind to perhaps delaying that somewhat so we could put more money into where it's needed elsewhere in the community. So I'll put that with my colleagues for consideration.
Okay. I have the mayor, and then I'll come back to you. You're good? Okay. Councillor Usher.
First of all, on the motion here, what about the last part, item number 6 in the motion, with respect to receiving the report for the water and wastewater?
Yeah,
Should that be added?
we'll do that as well. We
Yeah.
can just add, it would now be a part E, I
So,
guess.
yeah, so the other part is, with respect to Lorne Avenue, I don't want to really delay Lorne Avenue, but I just wondered if we really, and again, I haven't seen the estimate for it. I really don't remember what we did. And I just wondered if, because I personally really like the $2 million for housing, personally, and I can't remember what we did. So I just wondered if we really need $3 million for Lorne Avenue, and if we really need it now. So that would be my question, through you,
Mr.
to
Hayward?
staff.
So through the chair, the $3 million estimate is a good estimate from our facilities group, and they've tried to take into consideration appropriate budgeting and making sure that we don't come short, because it's never good when we come forward with a request for more information midway through a project. So we want to make sure we're good on that front. In terms of the direction that council set, we have right now an empty building. There are some security issues that we've had to address, which is increasing the carrying cost a little bit. But nevertheless, you've got an empty building, which creates sort of a dead area in that part of the city. So I think right now, the planning department under Mr. Fleming is out discussing with the community what some of the alternatives and options are, and they want to get going on that for the community, because I think it's been in the works now for a few years in terms of discussion. So once the community piece is done, then I think the direction from council was to go ahead and demolish the school and move to whatever was wanted to be developed in that area. And that's going to take some time to undertake, because we have to RFP for the demolition. We also have to then undertake all the other works that are necessary to redevelop that area. You know, we are delayed anyway by about probably, I would say, 4 or 5 months as we go and engage with the community again. But I think shortly after that, I think the community is going to expect something to happen.
Mayor?
Thanks very much, Chair. I just have maybe a follow-up question with, related to the funding. And so I know that the business case called for $2 million, and we've identified $1.6 million that could be available. And I'd look to Steve for him to speak to timing, or to the city manager to speak to timing. If we can set aside $1.6 million today, and then as we work our way through the year, if opportunities present themselves, is there an opportunity for staff to come back to us with some other creative solutions to fund this initiative in the months to come, should opportunities from the federal government present themselves?
Mr. Castizia, did you want to add anything? Mr. Palacio?
I'll speak to it through the chair. We have, and I think Mr. Jasisi also said that they may or may not get it all dealt with this year. And there's a reserve fund that we hold that money in as they need to call upon it. So certainly we have regular reporting in terms of our surplus deficit, and we can bring that information forward. As you can see, we've been far more active on our capital side as well, because this is a one-time ask. There's certainly opportunity through that process to add to. I would caution council, there are a number of big projects that you have on the plate and in front of you, and they are high-ticket items. And there's a lot of variability in that that we need to keep on the horizon. So I think also one of the things you want to do is make sure that you are getting a report back on how the money that you're setting aside for housing is being spent. I think you need to make sure it's meeting the goals that you have, or at least going to where you think it should be going. So,
if the mover of the motion would consider that a friendly amendment, I'd certainly support that as well, which is just direction for a report back at an appropriate time over the course of the year to see how things are going. This $1.6 million I see as a significant down payment and a demonstration of a further commitment to the Housing Development Corporation. that we've established here in London. We're one of very few communities across the country that has a mechanism like this that allows us to be a little bit more nimble, a little bit more creative, engage the private sector more to provide housing for those who need it the most in our community. I'll finish my comments with this. This is a compassionate thing to do. This is the right thing to do on so many levels. We consider ourselves a compassionate city. We've made significant commitments to address the housing crisis in our community. This is also jobs. And I think that shouldn't be lost on any of us, that when we see investments like this occurring in our community, then these are real jobs that are taking place in our community as well, and it's an investment on that level as well. So I'm happy to support this. Over the course of the year, we can watch this carefully. We'll look forward to a staff report back on how things are going, and potentially look for other opportunities to invest even more in this area if things seem to be going well. So thank you.
Okay, if I may, the clerk is working on an amendment, and we'll see how that flushes out. Vice Chair, would you take the chair, please?
As it turns out, I see Deputy Mayor Hubert at the top of the list. Go ahead.
So I have a couple questions. One is with respect to Lorne Avenue, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. We had a group here before us some months ago, and I think we moved towards demolition with a caveat if there was something that emerged out of that discussion that was fruitful and a reasonable business plan. I just want to sort of tick the checkbox on that. I see Mr. McPherson here who might be able to answer that question, Chair.
Go ahead.
Sure, through the chair. Absolutely. Council was looking for us to take a final look at some unsolicited proposals that have come in. We've set up a process through that with the Realty Services Group so that we can receive those in a form where they can be assessed. And that information's gone out to those groups. We're expecting responses back by May 12th. And there'll be another site inspection of the building so that they can put their best proposals forward. Then those be reviewed against the evaluation criteria that were in the RFP the first time, and give everybody the opportunity to take a look at it one last time.
Thank you. So in other words, we can go forward with this, and then we have everything lined up to go. Okay. I support this recommendation. The Lorne Avenue situation, as you know, Mr. Chair, that it has been ongoing it got delayed by the school board, needing the school for another year. And I think it's time, and I think the expectation in the community is that we move forward on this project, get the building down, get the site cleaned up, and then move forward with our plans so that at some point in not too distant a future, the park that we have committed to the community is actually there. I think that's a good thing. With respect to the Housing Corporation, I'll support the 1.6. I wouldn't support any more than that. I don't believe we should go into reserve funds. But I know that our staff are always looking for opportunities, both leverage, and if there's a golden opportunity to come back to council and to say, if we invest this, so we can realize that they're always ready. And I want staff to know that the door is open for that kind of conversation to happen both with this committee and with council as a whole. So I'll support that recommendation as well. Okay, thank you.
I have Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to really clarify my comments earlier. I didn't want anybody to think I'm not supportive of doing good work over on the Lorne Ave property. I just think that we as a council have many, many priorities, and I know that affordable housing is at the top of that list, and I just want to make sure that we maintain focus on that and focus elsewhere. When we have so many big projects going forward, sometimes I feel like we just need to take a little bit from another one to give to one of the top priorities. So I'm happy with where we've landed as a committee with this recommendation for council.
And do we also have the,
Yeah, I'm gonna add that, but it's just
okay, Counselor Helmut, go ahead, yeah.
messed up with people.
Thanks, and it'll teach me to wait till my colleagues go to get in my question. So, on some of the issues that have come up, I know we referred this matter of the $2 million request from the Housing Development Corporation to the 2016 surplus report. It feels like we're having a little mini budget discussion. At the time when we were discussing the budget, I don't recall anybody really strongly advocating for increasing funding to the Housing Development Corporation and really moving forward with it at that time. So we're now ended up here. I want to just remind everyone, we already have an annual contribution to the Housing Development Corporation Reserve Fund. I think it's $2 million a year. So it's not as though we're not doing something that we haven't already budgeted money. And frankly, this kind of increase is like a very significant increase over what we would normally do. I do believe affordable housing is important. What I don't like doing is too many pretty significant budget decisions in the sort of surplus report. I'd prefer to do them all at once when we're dealing with the budget and when we can weigh all the different priorities we've got. So I do like that we have these periods in time when we have an update about where's the surplus at. But we have the surplus policy to kind of guide what we do with the surplus when we end up with some. And this is sort of at the borderline of how much I'm willing to like talk about allocating money before it hits the surplus policy. And the idea of taking it down to zero, I think, is sort of saying, well, forget the surplus policy. We're just going to spend the money on these other things. On the specific other things, I think setting aside a source of financing for the demolition of Lorne Ave, which we've already approved. We dealt with that back in February. We said come back with a report about demolition. At that time, it was discussed it was going to cost something like $3 million. And I think we need to have that set aside sooner rather than later. The timeline for that was 12 months from the approval of that scenario, that's what we were going to be going forward with, that the demolition would be happening within 12 months. So I do think we need to set aside that $3 million for that. On the Housing Development Corporation contribution, what I really need to understand, and I'm glad Mr. Jacis is here, is you had, if I recall correctly from the business case that we dealt with, there were I think three sort of strategic investment properties that were, being considered. There was 50 additional units of affordable housing. Those are the metrics in the business case. So if you have $1.6 million, how are you going to choose between the acquisition of properties that might be good on a strategic longer term basis versus the actual creation of affordable housing units? Obviously, you won't be able to do all of that with less than $2 million.
So through the chair, our contribution this year will allow us about $10 million of federal provincial money with the combined amount that we currently have in our affordable housing reserve. We've currently started in 2016 with the money that you were able to allocate and the federal provincial money, 164 units, I believe, last year. We are at a shortfall right now in our community, and it's not going in the right direction. A couple of years ago when we started talking about the Housing Development Corporation, we were talking about vacancy rates of around 3%. Those vacancy rates are now at about 2%, and for one-bedroom units, they're at or below 1% in many neighborhoods. So this is sort of the compelling piece that you all already know. What we're planning on doing right now as part of the shift that we've made with the Housing Development Corporation is rather than moving to an RFP where you don't really know what's coming down the road for how many units you can move, we've moved to a request for qualified bidders approach where we are already working with enough units and enough developers in the planning process right now to motivate and maximize our dollars both for 2017 and for 2018. So we're planning right now, not just for the activities for this year, we're starting to plan for 2-3 years down the road. As a matter of fact, it's the one that we're least, the closer you are, the harder it is, the further out that you're doing your planning. So we can move many units in the course of a year. I'm not sure if I answered your question correctly, but currently we've got 165 units that you approved in May and September of last year. All of them are already underway, being worked on. So action happens very, very quickly.
Thank you. So my specific question is how are you going to trade off between the two metrics, between acquiring properties and building affordable housing units?
I'm sorry.
The targets you had in the business case were 3 properties and 50 affordable housing units.
Yes.
So if you only get 1.6 instead of 2 million, will you be able to do 40 affordable housing units? Will you do
It's a
50
great-
and drop the properties? Like what do
No,
you
it's a
think?
great question. So what we're working on is we've shifted some of the way we're doing things to a sliding scale of pro forma. So rather than a developer coming in with one pro forma and that's it, build it or it doesn't work, we actually have different economies that can come in at different places, so then we can maximize our dollars better. So if we have 3, for example, between large and small developments, we should be able to still maximize our investments using whatever number of properties. So we can go with more smaller or fewer larger. But if I could just say that I'm completely comfortable with the direction that you're going. I think that this is a council that fully understands not just the importance of affordable housing, but as I said earlier, the other competing priorities that you have. And one of the things that we can also be doing, and you've challenged us to do, is to work with both finance and the city manager on what are the other tools that we can be advancing collectively. So it's not just the affordable housing tools, it's also what are some of the municipal tools that we could be working on together. So I'm comfortable with that direction, and I think providing us some opportunity to work together on those strategies. I have no question of the value, as you well know, of what we're doing. In the last year, we've actually reduced the amount per unit, and we've increased the number of units, and we've increased the duration of those units, and your municipal money is coming back to you. So I think the metrics are there. It's just really how do we motivate and maximize them.
Perhaps I'll just try a different way of asking the question. So if you're just to think about the cost of a new affordable housing unit, just in terms of the amount of municipal dollars that would go into that unit, set aside the provincial and federal money, what would be the cost for an incremental new affordable housing unit?
I'm sorry, we vary that depending on how do we best maximize the federal provincial dollars. So for example, late last year in two developments that were roughly the same price, the amounts of municipal money were different because what we were really doing is, first of all, maximizing the federal provincial dollars because we know that our municipal dollars can be carried over within the reserve. So that amount does shift. What we're working on is we're working on roughly an overall allocation of about $90,000 to $100,000 per unit, knowing that a unit costs about $150 to $170 to build. So we have a mark that we have to try to achieve to be able to get there. And then our municipal dollars get stacked onto our federal provincial dollars depending on where they land. So the number that you're looking for actually varies. So in a project that was $5 million, we put in one case, $500,000. In a smaller one, we've put in a smaller amount. We're really working to make sure that not a penny goes back to the federal and provincial governments as a starting point.
Perhaps you could give me the range. It varies. What's the high end, what's the low end?
Yeah, through the chair, it really does vary. So for example, at 193 Clark Road, we only put in about $10,000 of municipal money because we were able to move so much more federal provincial money. And in another project, we maximized our municipal money. Again, our municipal money is only going into London-based projects. So we were able to maximize our municipal money in the 27 Centre Street because that was the first one where we actually worked on a strategy of going to longer affordability periods. And so what I did there in that case is I put in enough that it actually leveraged the build. So we were able to change the pro forma. It differs because in each building, the pro forma differs depending on land cost, depending on whether there's development charges. There's a lot of flexibility in the cost. And so the best I can give you is that it used to average at about $115,000 per unit. We're doing it now at about $100,000 per unit, and that's a combination of federal, provincial, and municipal money.
Thank you for bearing with me, committee members. So for the second example you gave 10,000 for the one, that seemed like at the low end. For the other one, the municipal contribution per unit would be like 75,000. Where was it
about
at?
Through the chair, about $55,000 in that other scenario. Generally, what we were doing in the past is we would stack municipal and federal provincial to achieve about $115,000 at about $55,000, $65,000 mix. But that didn't always work out that cleanly. So the range is between on the low end, it's been none in the county projects, of course, but on the low end and the municipal side, between 30 and 55.
Okay, that's helpful because, you know, the metric in the business case was maybe 50 units. If we use 55, potentially you could get something like 30 units, 29 units, something like that. It's helpful for me to understand what we're looking at in terms of what the returns would be on that kind of investment. Thank you. So I'm going to think about whether I want to support that whole amount or not. I think probably yes. I do have a question about the winter maintenance, and I know it seems like a long time ago that we were talking about that, but I might as well bring it up because we're almost finished here. So the budget for winter maintenance and snow control is something like $13 million. Being out by $1 million is quite a lot. And I don't recall really 2016 being a year where, like the explanations, I don't know that it really fits with what the experience was of 2016. I know it covers 2 fiscal years, but that particular winter season, and that we needed more salt and things like that. So I wonder if our staff could just speak to what was really driving $1 million overrun in the $13 million budget.
Certainly through the chair. A lot of the overrun was related not to plowing, because we didn't have a lot of snow accumulation this year, but to the need to manage icing and freezing conditions around that freezing mark, which we did spend a great deal of time at over this winter season. So it really was a reflection in input costs and the need to do more frequent preventative icing and brining activities to keep our roads safe.
Thank you. One of the items that's mentioned is paying people to be on standby. And so I'm wondering, perhaps our contracts with people work really well when we actually are plowing, and maybe they don't work so well when we're not plowing. So when you have these periods where you're not plowing, but you're still paying people something to be ready just in case. Are we looking at all at changing how we're doing some of the contracting so that perhaps we don't get dinged like that? It seemed like it was one of the pressures from a cost perspective was people not doing anything, so.
Certainly through the chair, that is one additional cost pressure we did experience this year. We do have to secure contractors early in the season, and we don't know what the season will end up bringing us. If we want to make sure those people are available, if we have extreme weather events, we can always have those discussions about what options we have as the city in terms of making sure we have service available, but aren't paying people, you know, as you said, because we didn't need them this year.
Okay, committee, I've got a moved and seconded. I'd like to move on if we can. So one quick.
I just have a quick question with respect to a question.
And let me just say, our new city manager has a flight to catch, so we have some time constraints. So if we're not done the public portion by 1:30, we'll have to go in camera to deal with the in-camera portion to allow him that, okay? So.
Mine is quicker than your response just now. Just a question based on a question that you asked Mr. McPherson, and I wonder if he could repeat it because I didn't quite understand what he was talking about with respect to. Did you say that you're out to asking some potential users about Lorne Avenue, and a response is coming back on March the 12th? And are you limited to those, or if there's any new ones who might be interested, would you entertain them?
Through the chair, I believe the direction was to open it up again one last time. There are some specific people who are seeking that opportunity, but it was sent out to interested parties, if I can call it that, who expressed an interest in one final attempt to make use of the building as it stands, and the date coming back to us is May 12th.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. I do have another question about the report, and then I want to weigh in on the comments some of my colleagues have made. The last question I have is, in previous reports and the budget updates, one of the vulnerabilities or the high-risk components has been the CIP, the funding of the CIP fund for our incentive programs for building. And I don't see it articulated in the same way in this report, and I'm wondering if that is something that should be noted and recognized, because I know that can have significant draws. on, our municipal revenues. And in some cases, in previous reports, it's been estimated that it's, upwards of $25 million over the course of the multi-year budget that we have to set aside. So is that still something that we should be concerned about and noted in this particular item? Because I notice it's not articulated in the same way in this report.
Yes, through the chair, it is something right now that's still of concern. However, you've already tasked the city planner and the city treasurer, who I'm speaking about in the third person now, to undertake a review of the CIP to see if we couldn't bring it in line with a bit more predictability and a little bit more focus on achieving some of the goals. That review is almost complete, and there will be a report coming to PEC on, I think it's the 25th of April, that deals with it. It has gone through public consultation, and I'm sure there'll be a lively discussion on it.
Great, thank you. And so I think there's a bit of foreshadowing there that must be good stuff in that report to not list it in this report as a risk as much. So perhaps there's some exciting things in there that will get that risk a little more under control. With the comments that my colleagues have made, and unfortunately, the more we debated this, the more I got concerned about some of the direction we're going on this. And for me, it really is a balance between, certainly I don't want to be seen today as against what are really important investments in our community, and quite frankly, funding investments that council has caused for itself. The Lorne Ave issue, we've decided a direction on that. We've got to put the money where it needs to be. It's difficult to vote against something like that. With the Housing Development Corporation, obviously I'm very supportive of the work the Housing Development Corporation is doing. But to me, what we're doing here, and Councillor Helmer's back and forth really emphasizes for me, is we're saying let's give the money, and then in F we're saying then let us know how you're going to spend it in a report. And I know, like, the questions that were being asked were really important. I think that there's a lot of value in investing in the Housing Development Corporation. I'd almost like to do it the other way around. I'd like to know, what are your plans for 1.6 if we do that? How are we going to leverage other dollars? What is the balances that Councillor Helmer was getting at in how it would be invested? Bring that to us, and then we authorize the $1.6 million. So I don't like doing it in this reverse order. It is going around the surplus policy. I don't think we have to, we don't have to shy away from that. We're authorizing these allocations before they hit the surplus policy. In some cases, that's completely legitimate when we have needs, and I'm not afraid to do that from time to time. Certainly don't want it to be the norm. But when we do that, we got to do it in the right way. We got to do it with the rationale. And we had our city manager and treasurer saying, this is not one I recommend. And it's probably, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, for the same reasons that I'm uncomfortable, and that's, I like to know what we're going to spend the money on. Then I want to spend the money, because then we get good value. That's the type of process we would have gone through in a regular budget process. It would have been scrutinized to a much higher level than now. And although we do have the business case that you provided us before, we're not fully funding it. And so exactly what we're doing with that, I'm not sure. As well, with the new federal announcements of investments, exactly how that money will be used may have changed from how it's contemplated in the business case. So I don't want to have to vote against that. And I really want to vote for it at council when it gets there, but I think I'm going to ask to have that part separate today, and I'm going to vote against that allocation. Not that I'm not unwilling to fund it, I just want to have that information before I make that decision, and I'd be happy to do that at council. I'd be happy to change my vote at council when we get there, if we can bring some more information on exactly what this $1.6 million is going to look like and how it's going to be funded. But for now, I'm going to vote against that portion. I'm going to vote for everything else in this, and I'll be looking for that information at council if you want me to vote a different way. I'm not going to add that as a motion, but if colleagues want to put that in as a motion, we can take that different direction.
So let me clarify. The motion before us that you're referring to, just for those that might not have it before them, is that be requested to report back at key points throughout the year as to how the funds, housing funds approved in D are being invested. So that's an update report on an ongoing basis. That's not telling us what they're going to do before they do it. That's reporting back to us. So just to clarify that. So, okay. if there's no other comments, I'll pull, what parts do you want pulled separately? The D, Counselor, and the F?
D and F.
Okay, so if we could call D and F together, is that okay, Counselor? So we'll call D and F separately. Between now and council, Mr. Gastisi, if there's some additional information that you might provide to Counselor Morgan, as well as to members of the committee and council, I guess to all of council, if you could do that through the clerk, that would be helpful to give added comfort to that. So I'm going to call the question on Counselor Helmer.
Just one thing I want to clarify about D. When we talk about one-time funding of 1.6 million, are we talking about a transfer into the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund? Or are we talking about a direct transfer to the Housing Development Corporation?
It would end up being a transfer to the Housing Development Corporation.
Okay, so I'll call everything except for D and F, which have been moved by the clerk. Do you have to adjust it, or we're good? Okay. Can I have that moved and seconded? I'll call that question. All in favor?
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, let's call D and F. Call the question.
Motion carries 5-1.
Colleagues, if we could turn back to our agenda, item number 6 is Cycle Link Squeaky Wheel Bike Co-op request for designation as a municipally significant event. You have the documentation. Does someone want to move that the squeaky wheel gets the grease?
Or the beer.
Councillor Usher?
I just want to say that I feel the same way as I did the last time with these, what I refer to as not so significant events. I just don't see the reason why. I understand why they're coming. They're not selling any beers. They just want to give it away. And I think that this is, we don't have a policy on this, and I can't support this at all. I think that it's good that they're having something of this nature, but I don't think that they need us to say that this is a significant event, to designate it as a significant event.
Councillor Park, would you like to move this?
I'd be happy to move it.
And a seconder, please. All in favor? Just a reminder that it's awkward language coming from the province
Motion
that
carries 5-1.
allows events to have a liquor license by being designated that. It's awkward. Okay, moving on. You've got added. So we have the council deferred, or sorry, Corporate Services Committee deferred matters list. The clerk notes that there's one additional item that needs to be added because it's deferred. Something oxymoronish about that. And what is it, clerk?
Yes, it's the matter with respect to the ward boundary report back, which is coming back at the public participation meeting. It'll be on the list and off the list very quickly as the meeting's on April 22nd.
Okay. All right. With that addition, could someone move the deferred list, please? Okay, I'm getting 2 nods. Councillor Helmer, sorry.
Thank you. So our deferred list is getting a bit long, I would say. And we're gonna need to bear down and get these things wrapped up. It seems to be going the wrong direction in terms of getting longer rather than getting shorter, as I see in many other committees, frankly. So.
Okay, I'll call the question. Yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah.
Motion carries 6-0.
Number 8 is Councillor Usher's request on, with respect to the Board of Directors at FCM. Is there a mover for that, other than Councillor Usher? Councillor Helmer, seconder. Councillor Morgan. Any discussion? Nope. I'll call that question.
Motion carries 6-0.
Folks, just out of respect for our new city manager, could do I have a motion to adjust some orders, or can I just move in camera?
We need
Okay, we have a number of added reasons to go in camera, and I need those to be moved, and then I think we'll go in camera. So, Councillor Park, you had an added reason to go in camera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try my auctioneer voice and read it very quickly. Matter pertaining to labor relations, employee negotiations, personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal employee with respect to employment-related matters, litigation or potential litigation, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for the purpose, and advice and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose. I'll take $1.
So that'll be noted as C5, and I think there's one other item from the city manager and chief human resource officer as well. So could I ask that you move that as well, Councillor Park? That'll be noted as C6, and I think it's the same reasons or very similar.
That additional reason would be a matter pertaining to reports, advice, and recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation concerning labor relations and employee negotiations in regard to one of the corporation's associations or unions, and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality and communications necessary for that purpose.
Okay, folks, could I ask that I have a motion to go in camera for those reasons? Councillor Park, okay, it's mover and seconder. All in favor? Okay, we'll shuttle across the
Motion
hall.
carries 6-0.
We're going to go in camera. We will reconvene in this room when we're completed those matters. Okay, folks, we have just a few items left to deal with. I have the item number 9, which is the London Police Services Board composition. We have a letter of acknowledgement. So I think motion to receive that, or did you want to speak to it? No, just want to receive it. Councillor Park wants to speak to it. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. I've also got some direction I'd like to give if possible, or maybe if it's not even needed. Fairly recently, we did some interviews, and publicly our committee had stated that we would welcome individuals to apply. So should this become a thing in the future, I wonder if we should give direction now to invite those participants to come back and apply for these new positions.
I think I understand where you're coming from, Councillor, and sorry, I'm just looking for, but I think the composition, it's another member of council, is it not?
Yes, one.
It's not a member of the community, so that changes that a little bit. Councillor Helmer?
So Councillor Park is quite right that we indicated to the members that they should consider applying for the provincial appointment, which is something that is appointed by the province, but that is a community member. And so yes, we have to add a councillor, but the provincial appointment would be a community member. The province adds one, we add a councillor. They add someone from the community, and we said, you've applied to serve as a city representative, why don't you consider applying to be a provincial representative? Which is through their public appointment secretariat. So I support that idea of directly telling those folks that.
Maybe I'm missing something, so I'll ask your indulgence, but if improved, the size of the police service board will immediately increase to 7 members to be constituted as set out, with 1 additional member from council, 1 appointed by the lieutenant governor. So they get another one, and then we get another one, right? But it's a member of council. Okay. But I thought what you were suggesting, Councillor, is one of the interviewees that we just interviewed would be a potential person? Is that, no? Okay.
Motion carries 5-0.
I'm delighted that Ms. Graham's timing is impeccable, because we're now turning to item number 10, which is the Canada 150 Community Infrastructure Program. And look for any questions on that item. Councillor Park and then Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. So I recognize that timelines are as they are, and sometimes things come as added items, but this one, for me, I had a little bit of issue with. I need to understand more about some of these projects, like expansion to Kiwanis Park, additional splash pad at Queen's Park, in terms of like our working list of like what projects next on our docket. Are these the ones that were at the top of the list, or were they just chosen to dovetail into the Canada 150 stuff? I just want to make sure that we're doing the warranted work before we do the nice to haves.
Thank you, and through the chair. So the way that the projects that we apply for were selected started with a discussion with the senior leadership team. And the starting point for that was very much what are the projects that have already been identified in various master plans, other strategic documents. So we know the things that the community needs and their support for, and that have some alignment with the granting criteria, ideally to increase the odds of being successful in applying for funding. But certainly they're not just picked because it sounds like it would fit. They're picked from a place of already being identified as by the respective managing directors as things that we need to be working on.
Well, I'm delighted that one of the projects that's funded was a splash pad at Queen's Park. I've advised the neighborhood that we were discussing it today, and I can tell you the reaction has been quite positive. So.
Looking forward to opening day. Councillor Morgan?
Yes, I'll just make some comments based on what Councillor Park said. I'll be brief. And I think that with these funding programs, and I remember the first time, I think the first one came up, I think I'd emailed Ms. Graham and said like, hey, have you seen this? And you had just seen it, and the timeline to apply was like weeks away. So unfortunately, sometimes our partners who fund these don't give a lot of time for us to go out and do the type of community engagement that maybe we would like to do on a celebration event and identify the items with the same sort of public dialogue that we'd normally have. And so sometimes we're relegated to piecing together those that would have widespread public support, having a really short discussion at council and prioritizing those, and then moving forward with the ones that we can. But it would be ideal if, when other levels of government are giving away money for these sorts of things, that a little more lead time is put together to allow us to engage the community in a different way, which we like to do at the local level.
Through the chair,
Lead time.
we agree.
It's the bane of the nonprofit and public sector. You've got 48 hours or 21 days to produce a monster of a grant application, so. Go ahead, Kate.
Through the chair, just to that point, I would though express thanks to the members of this committee and council. Even this particular thing being an added report, there's a lot of back and forth between legal departments federally and here. And I mean, we've brought you now 3 agreements with several projects totaling just around the $2 million mark across all of these funds. And there are a lot of logistics to it, so there isn't often a lot of lead time. And I know we're throwing very large, meaty reports on added agendas, so appreciate your flexibility with us.
A motion, please. Okay. Yep. I'll still take a motion.
Yeah, and I'll move it too. I just want to make sure I understand the funding and where it's coming from, because when I read the report, it sounded to me, unless I'm missing something, that but within the 4 projects here, we are contributing about $2 million. And am I missing something? Because I'm reading down below also, and it talk about $325,000. And I'm not so sure where we're getting the $2 million. That's what I'm really looking for. Help me understand it.
Through the chair, and my apologies for being unclear. So the 2 million number is all of the funding that we've attracted from both the federal and provincial governments for 150 related programs. So the intake 1 from the federal money, we attracted about 750,000. Intake 2 is 1.2 million. And then we also were able to bring in just over 125,000 from the Ontario government. So it's the sum of all of the 150 investments that we've attracted into the City of London are around the $2 million mark. So that was the reference. My apologies for being unclear.
So I want to be sure you and I are talking about the same thing. If I look under on page 7 and 8, each project has a federal spending and a municipal spending. And if I add up the municipal contribution of these 4, that comes up to approximately $2 million. And that's our money? So how are we funding that?
I'll maybe turn to Alan from Finance to speak to it, but in the report, there's a source of financing page on each project. So they're being funded from different places depending on the service area they fall within and a number of other factors. So, but if you'd like additional details, certainly Alan's our expert.
Thank you.
Any further, do you need anything further? No? Okay, I'll take the seconder. And I'll call the question.
Motion carries 5-0.
And item number 11, administration is looking for some direction and in terms of filling a spot on the London Hydro Board of Directors. I'm not sure how many of current committee were part of the interviews last go round. So 2, so I'll look to you to give some comment on the suggestion here. Is we do have Mr. Johnson is going to be quote unquote retiring from the Hydro Board, so there's a couple of options. We could go back out and canvass, or we could go to one of the other members that were considered the last time. And I think the clerk canvassed to see if they were still interested, and they're both still interested, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, I'm in the committee's hands. Any thoughts? Councillor Helmer.
I am of the view that we should repost, but that we should consider these two candidates and just advance them back to the interview stage again, because I thought they were both quite good. 7 months is, I think, a fairly long time in terms of people's planning about whether they're interested in doing something. There may be people who never knew there was a vacancy who would be really well qualified, and I think it's always a good idea to say, listen, these are important board positions. Say, now the makeup of the board is this. It's a different set of skills. For one, now people know Mr. Johnson is retiring. They know Mr. Smith is now a member of the board. It's a different makeup, and they might have an interest in serving where they didn't before. So I would be in favor of posting again, but also bringing these people forward to the same kind of position they're at before, because I think they were both good candidates.
Councillor Park.
Thank you. I'd like to second Councillor Helmer's motion on that. I think it's a good way for us to move forward on this.
Clerk, can you tell me when Mr. Johnson would go off the board?
Per the legislation, he would hold office until the next AGM or until his successor is approved. I believe it's his intent to resign as of the next AGM, which is scheduled for May 29th.
Okay, so we wouldn't be able to go through that process in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So if it's the committee's desire to do that, which seems like to move, then Mr. Johnson would probably have to stay in place until such time as a successor was selected. So the committee's motion should be to ask the clerk then to repost and also inform the chair of London Hydro that that would be our intention. But I also hear that we're willing to consider the other two individuals as part of the process. Is that correct? Okay, great. Okay. Moved and seconded. I'm sorry?
Question for the clerk.
Yes.
Can you remind me when was the date that we interviewed these folks for? Is it just about 3 months ago?
Interviews were conducted last summer. The final appointment was done at the end of August.
Okay. Did you want to second that, Councillor Park? Oop. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, so the process we went through last time, when we posted, we generated a lot of applicants and then we narrowed it down. I understand the direction as I read it on the screen. I think my colleague's intent is that we have 2 people that we consider interviewing. I assume that we would want to follow a same sort of direction. So we don't have to decide that today. We certainly could and provide that direction and recommendation to council. But I think we should be clear to the clerks or to civic administration what our intent is, so that they're not bringing a whole bunch of applicants to join an interview panel, that we have some sort of direction on process for narrowing that down on who we would add potentially for interviews.
Clerk?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, it's actually the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee that would do the initial process and determine what they wanted to do in terms of the size of the shortlist. You're quite right. We started out with a number of candidates, narrowed it down to 11. And then each individual council member was asked to pick 6, which we ultimately narrowed down to 3 candidates for final interview. So at this point in time, I'm not sure if you want to be that prescriptive for the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. What I'd suggest is we go out, we get the names, SPPC looks at the lists they have and determine the best course of action from that point, as it's them that would have to refer it actually back to CSC for interviews.
Through the chair, I'm good with that. I just wanted to be clear on what our process was, so I understood it. So I'm very comfortable with that approach.
So just these two individuals really go through the whole process again. They may or may not make the short list, who knows? Is that the intent? Councillor Helmer?
As it says in the motion, it says invite Mr. Holborn and Ms. Parks to the final interview process.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. So they're two of the, if you're going to go 3, they're 2 of the 3.
They're 2 of X to be determined by SPPC, yes.
Councillor Usher?
I really do respect my colleagues' proposal here. However, I have to tell you that this is just a few months ago. That's the reason why I asked when. I thought it was just about 4 months, but obviously it's about 7 months. But obviously they applied about 2 or 3 months before. And, you know, we're dealing with professional people, and I think that we have to act professional. We interviewed these folks. First of all, we went through the process of, when I say we, I mean the clerk, of going through all the applications and brought these people to us. And we had some pretty good candidates at the time. And from my perspective, because it's just recent, and if they are prepared to leave their name, I have absolutely no qualm to select this next board member from the people that we interviewed at that point in time. So I don't want to go there and look for additional candidates. I'd much prefer to just seek it from there. If I read this rightly, what we're doing, my colleagues are suggesting that we go out and ask for additional candidates. I think that that's just taking up a lot more time unnecessarily when we know that we have some good candidates. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to vote against this with all due respect.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll call the question.
Motion carries 3-2.
Okay, I think that comes to the end of our agenda. If there's any other issues or inquiries or anything of those sorts, I don't see any. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved by Councillor Park, Councillor Helmer, all in favor. Thank you very much.